All right, let's move on to the club that I've already mentioned. Big news out of Stuttgart this weekend. Sebastian Hoeneß signs a new long-term contract. I think that's caused some tears in some other places. Leipzig, who probably had some hope that they would maybe be able to get him. But Hoeneß wants to stay in Stuttgart and wants to stay the long-term new contract until 2028. No exit clause. That's the most important part. I always feel that Hoeneß's next move is going to probably be back home to Munich, Stefan. That's always been my thought. With that name, it's... Where else are you going to go? It's kind of like written in the stars, isn't it? But, the other big story, speaking of Munich, maybe when he goes to Munich, there will be a player waiting for him who he's currently working with, and that's Nick Woltemade. See what I did there? That's a great transition. Sebastian Hoeneß to stay. The question is Nick Woltemade leaving for Bayern Munich? I would probably say not so quick. This is probably a name that they've looked at. Woltemade is a fascinating player. I've written a bit about him when I saw him like 10 days ago in that really crazy Leverkusen Stuttgart game at the MHP Arena in Stuttgart, and I thought he was outstanding. He was probably the best player on the field. He's a very, very interesting profile. There's this weird number mix between the number 9 and number 10. Very tall, very good in the air, very good with his feet despite his height. In my opinion, only going to be a matter of time until he plays for Germany's senior team, because he has Julian Nagelsmann written all over him in terms of what he can provide, right? In fact, probably a player that would have maybe even helped him already in that 3-3 against Italy. You bring him on late, he probably can hold the ball a lot better than someone like Adeyemi, for example. So really interesting profile, and Bayern Munich have looked at him sort of as a Harry Kane backup solution, and this is where I'm having my problems with this story, because as I've already said, I guess Kane is playing more of a playmaker times 2, but for the development of the player and the way that he operates, I'm not quite sure this is someone that you want as a backup for Harry Kane, or if he's even ready yet to make that step up. I would like to see him for another year or two at least in Stuttgart.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, actually, considering the dramatic turnaround we've seen so far this season, considering how little he did at Werder Bremen. I'm sure Bremen fans will be pulling their hair out of the thought of Bayern spending 20 or 30 million euros on this guy in the summer. But, the weird thing about Waldemar is that you look at his youth record and he was scoring goals for foreign under 17s, under 19s in Werder Bremen's team. He also had a pretty decent record for the Germany under 21s. He scored goals, a lot of goals, at just about every level until he got into that Werder Bremen first team. He was even on loan at Elversberg. Yeah, sorry. He had 27 goals and assists in 35 games there, which is just insane. Didn't work out at Werder Bremen, and then he's obviously gone to Stuttgart, and it kind of feels like he's just kind of got back to where he was. He's got back to what he does best. And you're right, he's been such a fascinating player to watch this season. He's actually probably one of the most enjoyable players to watch, because there's nothing better in football than watching a big guy who's good with the ball at his feet. I know it's an old cliche in football, but he dribbles tremendously well. He's got such a great turn of speed on him. He's despite his height, his centre of gravity is so low, and he can really kind of make the most of small spaces in the box, which is obviously what he's done for Stuttgart tremendously well this season. And he's always had that capacity to kind of play off a striker or allow other players to play off him as the target man. And I think that's probably what Bayern see in him. He does kind of have a lot of the attributes that Harry Kane has, in the sense that he can play as a penalty box striker. You can stick him in the box and just swing crosses into him all day long, and he eventually will score a header. Or you can pull him back to play as almost like a false 9, and he can, you can very easily see him playing up front for Bayern and having like Musiala or Michael Olise or whoever else running off him quite easily. And I honestly think, now you're right, the story itself was a bit flimsy, so we'll take it with a pinch of salt. But if someone was to turn around to me and say, who do you think would be the best case scenario as a backup striker for Bayern this summer, Waldemar is probably as good as you're going to get, because they're not going to be able to go. For example, I saw they were linked with Guillaume Ceres. I think that's how you pronounce it, the Sporting striker, the Swedish guy.
Kukeres,
yeah.
right?
and
Swedish, Hungarian.
Yeah. And I mean, I thought, well, that's just never going to happen. They're not going to go out and spend like 80 million euros on a striker when they've got Harry Kane in that team. But Woltemade, he's only 23. He's only just turned 23 last month. In fact, actually, I should have said happy birthday to Jadon Sancho, by the way. It's his birthday today as we're recording. I checked that. I forgot to say that earlier on. But yeah, I think picking up a 23-year-old striker from Stuttgart for 20, 30 million euros, and a player who would probably be happy sitting on the bench for most of the season. Now, he's better than that, but, you know, Harry Kane's not getting any younger. He may even, in fact, have ambitions to leave the club if he goes on and wins the Bundesliga or the Champions League this season with Bayern. And having Woltemade as his kind of understudy, or Woltemade as as Kane's understudy, and or kind of step in, I think works really well. In fact, I would even say he's quite similar to Thomas Müller in many ways, the way he can kind of play in that final third. So I do think he fills a lot of the gaps in that Bayern front line. He's an exciting young player. But yeah, you're right. The only kind of thing that I would be wary of if I was Bayern is, well, is it a flash in the pan sort of thing? Or is this the real Woltemade, you know, finally coming of age and showing what he's capable of in the Bundesliga? But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But if I was a Bayern fan, I'd be quite excited by the story.
Well, I think this. I mean, I was joking about this earlier, but I think for Woltemade to be a success, you probably also need Sebastian Hoeneß, the coach, right? Because he does work very well in this system, which, you know, I do think it's destiny that Hoeneß is one day going to Bayern Munich. I think it's probably written in the stars, but you know, maybe then we'll see him reunified with Angelo Stiller and Nick Woltemade at a Bayern Munich dress. You can already do the you know, some like accounts do these graphics and they have them like already put in the new jerseys and all that. So you can do that. But yeah, I think Nick Woltemade has been having an outstanding season. He's a really fantastic player to watch. It's really interesting to watch him live, which, you know, I had the pleasure of doing this just a few days ago, and at the Super Cup as well. Before the Super Cup, and you know, that is, I think, it's one of those players that you really appreciate watching live because he can read the game so well. I think it was in that first Stuttgart goal that he set his pass actually set up leveling, and that's how deep he was in that situation, which brings back to your point where that he is really kind of a little bit of a Thomas Müller type, and yeah, maybe that is also why Bayern Munich are interested in him. We still don't know what's going to happen with Thomas Müller, right? He's been very coy about his future and what's going to happen in the summer. Is he going to retire? Is he maybe doing a year in the United States? Is he playing another year for Bayern Munich? He's really not made any decision in that regard, because if he had made a decision, you know, he jokingly said this to Florian Plettenberg on Sky. He said, like, well, shouldn't you know already? But I tell you what, if there was a decision made, I think a lot of people would know already, right? It's like, this is not something that if he tells someone, we all will find out really quickly. And there hasn't been a decision yet. So I think that's also something that keeps Bayern Munich a little bit in the air too, because while I think that they probably wouldn't be opposed to moving on, and, you know, maybe bringing in a new younger player and continue the squad reshuffle under Vincent Kompany, if he makes a decision to play for another season, Bayern Munich will probably honor that. But that also will slow down the process of them having to rebuild your squad and like bringing in a player to replace him. And maybe that's where the Nick Woltemade rumor really comes from. It's really about, Bayern Munich, and Bayern Munich are looking at players, right? They have to. That is their due diligence to see, okay, if Thomas does retire, who are we going to bring in to fill that squad role? And maybe that's where he's on the list.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to go down another Harry Kane rabbit hole, because there's plenty of episodes of the show on that, and my thoughts on Harry Kane and what he does and doesn't do for Bayern. All I would say is that it might be worth bearing in mind the positive example that Michael Olise has made in this team, in the sense that he's a very young player, and he was given game time and space to grow into at Bayern, and he's taken it with incredible speed and talent, and he's now one of Bayern's most important players, and very few people would have probably predicted that last summer when they signed him. And he's obviously got a lot more game time at the top level under his belt than Woltemade does, because he was obviously doing the Premier League for a number of years. But I think there's something there to be said for just kind of maybe Bayern just maybe throwing caution to the wind a little bit more with and playing more younger players. And you know, and there's also like Bayern do have a pretty good history of kind of having these kind of, I don't want to call them second string strikers, but they've always had typically a backup striker who's obviously very good, proven in the Bundesliga.
Chupo.
Exactly. Yeah, but even, exactly. There's so many before that, you know, like Olisic. No.
Yeah, Olic.
Yeah, I was getting confused with
Sandro Wagner's another one. Sandro Wagner did really well for them. Yeah.
Pizarro. Although I don't know if I'd call him a backup striker, but they've always been very good at picking up strikers who know how to score goals in the Bundesliga, and they've always been useful players, and I think Woltemade can be that. Although I was just checking there as you were talking, and if they can't convince Sebastian Hoeneß to move with them to Bayern, they could always pick up Horst Stefan, who who remains the head coach at Elversberg, who was obviously the coach for Woltemade when he was there. He's still there. He's been coaching there since 2018, so I'm sure he'd be ready to make a step up to Bayern as well if they want to get the most out of him. And if they had to replace Vincent Kompany as well in the summer.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, a lot has to go wrong, I think, for Vincent Kompany to no longer be Bayern Munich coach next year. Although, you know, some Bayern fans, I think, are getting a little nervous because the Leverkusen play on Friday and the gap could shrink overnight to 3 points. So, we'll get to that. We get into that later this week. But, you know, you mentioned Elversberg. Elversberg are only 5 points of a promotion spot in the second Bundesliga. So you better get used to pronouncing that name. Although I don't think they actually have a stadium to play in the Bundesliga. They would have to move somewhere else. But that's an entirely different story. All right. Well, Woltemade to Bayern Munich, maybe, is I think what we're going to say here.